Hello, everybody. I'm your host, Chris Carr, and we will be discussing the creative model presented by Creative Muse. And today, my special guest is
Virginia Wagner. Hello.
hello. And how would you describe yourself in the sense of you, if you were to be like, hi, I'm Virginia, and as an artist, I do what?
As an artist, I paint, I write, I teach, and I've started teaching myself animation as well.
So, and when did you realize that you were a creative person? Like, when's the earliest kind of memory you have or have been told about of you expressing yourself creatively?
I I think we're all born this way. I think a lot has been said about this, but I feel that children have absolutely manic, wild imaginations, and I was lucky to have scientist parents that turned me on to the crazy wonders of the natural world and just had me play outside all day as a kid. So it started really young. I remember naming all my trees in my backyard after different goddesses and gods. And I was also really into sharing when I was little. I would always make all the adults in the room stop what they were doing and um, watch me climb up onto a table and recite a play that I had just written or a song with some sort of crazy costume that I had just created.
So,
So
if you,
always,
so would you say like making things or expressing self is intrinsic to who you are?
yeah, absolutely. I think some of my um, some of the things that have inspired me the most is when I find that in something that someone else has created, something I've read or something I've watched, that rings true to me. And when I'm able to make something that connects with someone else, I feel kind of most satisfied. And also, I love the flow state of the process itself, when I can get into that. So both the sharing and the making are really important to me.
Can you tell me what flow state means to you?
Flow state for me is when you are in the process in a way where you're kind of just acting and reacting to what's happening in some sort of organic rhythm that develops with the medium. Often that's not the case. I mean, I definitely don't wait around for flow states. I work a lot, and a lot of that is just pushing through. Like, I mapped out a plan, I execute it, or I experiment, and the experiments are choppy and maybe don't lead anywhere. But those good days in the studio are where there's a bit more improvisation between what you're making, what it looks like, you kind of intuitively reacting to that and then taking the next step.
Can you speak a little bit about that idea of inspiration per se? Like there are writers I've been around that like get writer's block and go years without writing, or there are people that leave a medium for a decade and then come back to it,
Mm.
what have you. Um, how do you view that with your painting? Do you wait for inspiration? Is your drive to work or look at it as almost
Mm.
like a vocation slash occupation part of inspiration? Or is there a noticeable difference? Like, is that flow state a more inspired time? Can you give me some understanding of that?
Yeah, inspiration is a funny, fickle muse, but I I do think for myself, I'm carrying around more ideas than I'll probably ever get time to flesh out in this lifetime, unless I get turned into a vampire or something and really get to play it out. But I love the little book by David Lynch called Catching the Big Fish, which talks about ideas and inspiration. And his big metaphor that threads through that is something I use when I think about my own work. And it's that the first nugget of a project often starts as something that just kind of lodges in your mind in some way. Some image, it could be a song, it could be a synesthetic combination of things. And you just know that it's salient. You know it has kind of power, and it kind of forms a seed or bait, as he likes to call it. And then you can kind of go fishing with that. So you can take it into the realm of the studio or into the realm of reading or research and dangle it out there and see what kind of catches onto it. And maybe it catches like something a little bit bigger, then you can go fishing with that. And in order to know whether he is being authentic to his project, he holds up any new thing with that original bait and says, okay, does this belong in the same world? Yes, great. Then I'm going to use that as another chapter. No, I'm going to file that away. Maybe that can become another seed for another project. So that is useful for me. And I collect. I think collecting is important and maybe a way that my inspiration is cataloged. I wrote down my dream just now from last night. It was very strange and dark. But just have that in this journal that I carry around everywhere. I sketch in that journal. I take writing notes in that journal. And those are little nuggets that could form seeds for ideas that could potentially become projects.
So for people that are in a certain way hyper creative or hyper productive, or like you said, have more ideas than they can possibly like physically do in the amount of time we have, how do you sort what takes precedent, or how do you sort then for you what is most imperative to take from seed, idea, beginning, lure point to something you'd want to share with others?
I think that can be tough. I think when I was younger, I would start 12 projects in a month and maybe not finish any of them. And finishing's hard. I've heard it said that the last 10% of a project takes 90% of the time and energy. I think that part is the least kind of free in terms of wildly brainstorming and like letting your imagination go crazy. So I do really feel that it's important to choose some and push them all the way through to the end and then see what you have and learn from that as a more mature artist at this point. Um, and, in terms of choosing which ones I take through to that extent, I think some of it is which ones have the most potential energy to me, which one are kind of weighing heaviest on the mind, but also it's a lot of practical concerns. Um, if I applied to a couple grants, which grant did I get? um, I got a grant for a graphic novel project. Great. So I'm going to go forth with that graphic novel. And, as much as the you use that bait to catch new ideas. You can also use that bait to catch actual resources in the real world, such as time and money and other collaborators, and ones that happen to be energetically moving through the world in a way that keeps them supported and afloat. Um, those can be the ones that you focus on for this chapter.
You make me think of something that I haven't asked anyone else about. How have you then been able to be creative with time management, prioritizing, and creating a life where you get to spend a fair amount of time making art? You work in a field where you still engage with art, but you are able to pay rent, or if you need to apply for programs or go out of town, you're able to do that. How has creativity been implemented in that sense of like developing this life dynamic?
Hmm. Yeah, good question. I think it's, a mix of practicality and creativity. Um, I, for myself, have never, never worked in kind of outside job that's 5 days a week. For me, even straight out of school, I would only work maybe 4 days a week. Um, and I needed at least three in the studio in terms of that very practical balance. And so for 7 years out of school, I worked in a variety of artists' studios as a studio assistant or studio manager. I worked for Wangechi Mutu, Julie Heffernan, Getty Saboni, Adam Helms, Miriam Kibesa, Andrew Andrzejczyk, so many different artists from whom I learned kind of the practical aspects of art making. I learned how to manage an artist studio. And then I learned also like all those kind of strange lessons, like how does somebody structure their day so that they can actually have protected time for creative thought? Because these were artists that had successfully launched their careers to the place where they could have a studio that could help support other artists. So I did learn a lot from them, and now I teach. And I teach at the college level, which does protect your time in a way. Although as an adjunct, the pay is very low, so that's difficult. Residencies are really great for artists because they're often funded. So you get to travel to a new place that helps you think differently and explore a different space mentally, physically. But you are not losing money on that. You're kind of gaining new contexts and new contacts, but through the support of a foundation. So I've done a lot of residencies also. And I think the most important thing is just really protecting some time and keeping it, keeping the bubble of all the crazy, wonderful things of the city out from it, keeping your beautiful roommate away from it, keeping all your fantastic friends away from it, being able to shut the door for really long passages of time. And those passages are not going to be fully productive. I think you need a lot of space around the time that you're making art, to just bubble and think and, stare at a wall.
It makes me a question I'd ask you as a painter. Then do you have a different relationship with how, I don't want to say comparatively, right? But in terms of just maybe structurally or based on what it is, like I just interviewed a photographer and most of their work is portraiture. So they're always dealing with other people when they're initially creating certain elements of their work. Whereas historically, it seems like painters tend to be more solo. I don't know many people that really enjoy heavy like painting work with bunches of people around. Usually there's a certain element of isolation. Can you talk a little bit about that? Do you see that? Do you enjoy or appreciate a me time, alone time to just be with the art?
Yeah, absolutely. And I also have a writing practice. I think that's also quite solitary and needs quiet. And I bring up Virginia Woolf's A Room of One's Own often, but I think it's still so salient. She talked about how there were few canonical great women authors before her time in 1920. And she believed that was because before that time, women couldn't lock a door and be in a room alone for large stretches of time. There just was no private space for women, kind of at least within her culture. And so I've really felt that I've shared spaces most, if not all, of my life, and I've shared studio spaces as well. Rent is really deep in New York, so it's hard to have any kind of private space. But I've spent a lot of attention tracking my own attention, and I'm much more clear. And I can fish in deeper waters when I have isolated and protected alone time that is completely isolated. And I love that. I love like spending a tons of time alone and then being very social, coming over to Gamba and meeting a bunch of people and collaborating after I've kind of put in those hours.
Yeah, and you and I have collaborated on a project. How does that sit differently in terms of your animation, where you worked with actors, you worked with me as an audio person and doing kind of soundscaping, but it wasn't just like you gave it over to me, like we worked on it together in certain capacities. In when you do collaborative work, do you feel the art allows you to connect with people differently than when we just sit around talking?
Yeah. But when you and I sit around talking, it's it bleeds into our collaborations as well. I think the time that we spend together in conversation will probably like feed something we do 2 years from now or something. So certain friends who also are thinking in these creative networked ways um, are are part of the fabric of what I do and are kind of always feeding that. And so, yeah, I don't think there's a strict um, kind of line between that and some of my other friends who I've been kind of gestating a new collaboration with, having a dinner with them or like going for a long walk with them. It can all buoy the project
Right.
or maybe a future project down the line.
Well, then do you get a different, I don't want to say result, but like, do you get a different kind of fulfillment or a different experience when you collaborate with people versus working on a solo project?
Absolutely. Um, Yeah, I have a lot of feelings about collaboration because it's new for me. In the last couple years, I've done a few, and coming from a completely solo practice, it's been so exciting and deeply frustrating in some ways. I've kind of learned one thing I'll never do again is have kind of five collaborators without defined roles where we're all in charge and like all the director. I think that I learned the hard way doesn't work so well. Um, I think I love when a friend, say, is a musician and then has a concept and they need art from me. And so I can kind of work with them to ideate and imagine into that and then create art for them. And then also, I love kind of being the director of a little world and saying, I've spent a lot of time developing this. Like, can you see it? Could you conceptualize a sonic scape for this? Because, yeah, I don't have the capability for that. And it's really satisfying when somebody can say like, oh yeah, I can hear it. Like I see what you've made visually, but I can hear it. And when I listen to that and I think, oh yeah, I you've managed to build out a dimension to something that I created in my own head that couldn't that I couldn't have done myself. And it matches in terms of the type of world that I wanted to build. So it's satisfying because something that you've mm, started as a little seed in you has grown to a place where other people can say, "Oh, I know what it feels like to be there, and I can add to it," and and that seems like a win.
Yeah. And how important is it to you that people have positive responses to your artwork? So how like you have that feeling of like, oh, that's cool that like you felt the vision. When you put up an exhibition or when you present your work to folks you've never met, people that you don't know, possibly through a gallery or an institution where you don't have a whole lot of personal connectivity. Uh, do you care if people like your work? What does that mean, like for the type of work you do? What does it even mean when people say they like it?
Hmm. Well, in art school, we talk about critique, and I try to tell my students not to use I like or I don't like, but to engage um, on a level of what does this bring up for me? What does it remind me of? What do I see? Because looking at a piece of visual art, you might think, oh, the same thing is in front of these 10 people, they must all see the same thing. But that's not the case. It all gets transferred through their own particular vision and experience. And so I would hope, the people coming to it would engage in that way as well. But yeah, I care. I'm making things for people. So I want them to have an experience with the work. Um, my work is not, mm, my work is very balanced, I think, in terms of the darkness and lightness in the world. And so it's not that they're necessarily going to be a joyride in terms of engagement with the subject. Um, but I hope that it affects them either intellectually, in the body, um, in any kind of emotional way, that they spin out a story from it, possibly that it sticks with them in some way. Um, yeah, it's so impactful and meaningful when I see work that does kind of one of those things, hits me on some chakra and um, lives with me in some way. Uh, some of the best work I've seen changes your goggles,
Mhm.
like kind of briefly mm, shifts your lenses and allows you to, when you step away from the work, kind of look at the world around you in a slightly different way.
Yeah.
Uh, yeah,
Yeah. I mean,
goals.
I clearly am biased in this, in that I make art all the time. If you put me on an island and there's an artist and a doctor, I'm probably going to be like, I want the doctor with me. Like, I'll teach them how to paint. But I don't know a single doctor that hasn't been inspired by art, or that hasn't found meaning in life via art in some capacity or not. And I am a believer that in the full world, art's a very necessary component to people understanding themselves, attaching meaning to things. But for you, how do you negotiate? And this would be one of our final questions. How do you negotiate your creative drive and this idea of aesthetics, like it's just beautiful, versus meaning and a person being changed, affected, their goggles being altered a little bit? How do you view that? Like, are there any things you do just for the sake of, I think it looks nice? Or are there things where you realize it may not have as much acceptance, but it's meaningful to you? Or is that a
Mm.
is that something you even deal with or think about?
Yeah, I like that question. Um, beauty. I find I find beauty threads through what has the most weight for me in terms of the the objects, the subject matter, the landscapes that I'm drawn to, the ones that haunt me in some ways. I find that I don't have to look for beauty because beauty will already be there, but those things that call me are often, um, like I said, balance between some sort of lightness and darkness, some sort of growth and decay, some sort of construction or deconstruction, pain or and rebirth. Um, and yeah, I'm drawn to sites that are very much in turmoil and tension, maybe between humans and the natural world, or if it's a body, a site of maybe wound and healing. Um, and beauty's always been there as long as the thing itself has a draw for me. So I guess I think more about like what has that potential energy.
Right.
Um, and and yeah, she just shows up.
You mentioned something earlier, and then it kind of reminded me of what you're saying now, is a haunting or a weight. Do you feel, and now we're close to the end, but do you think, but this is where, that's why I like doing like 2 hour long interviews, but we, that's not business. Um, do you think there's like a weight or a burden that some artists carry, or in this case yourself, of needing to release, or there being something where you don't have to try to be creative? It's almost like I have to try to figure out a way to get it all out, or get it all off me, or get it like it's almost like, it's sticky, get it out. Do you understand what I'm saying here?
Totally a bit of an exorcism. Um,
That's sure, go to
yeah, I think. that can be a useful metaphor for making. Certainly, it's a gift for me in times of pain or processing. It's very physical and real to take something that's very tangled in your head and maybe causing pain, to untangle it in some way and externalize it and have it be an object that can communicate and that can maybe cause someone else some sort of relief from maybe recognition or something like that. Um, I definitely don't believe that, art is better coming from people who are always feeling tortured. I think if you're always in a state of great pain, it's very difficult to make art. And, best case scenario, you keep yourself um, as healthy and balanced as possible so that you can, um, complete projects to the end through all that hard part so that you can be an effective channel for ideas. Um, but, life is full of all kinds of heavy and things will happen to us as artists throughout our lives that will weigh with intensity, whether they be, beauty and love or like pain and loss. And so um, having developed a practice of processing and externalizing is really wonderful. I'm glad I have that as a human. It's something I'm very grateful for.
Yeah, yeah. So before we head out, is there anything you would want to tell 14-year-old version of yourself about being creative or creativity?
Um, it's the best, and you're uh, all the wild ideas that you're having right now are just as good and valid as the ideas that led to the work that you see in MoMA or the Met. Um, so you should write them down and, keep track of what you're seeing, what you're experiencing, collect, whether that's taking photos of things or taking notes or making sketches. And um, as you develop your practice throughout your life, you'll just get kind of better at spinning those into something that can speak to and with other people.
Thank you for that. And for folks that would like to see your work or learn more about you, how can they find you?
Uh, Instagram is Virginia Wagner, and my website is Studio Virginia.
Awesome. And also, I'll add on, this is just my personal perspective. I am speaking just for myself here. Um, we spoke a lot about your creative process and some of the more ideological, esoteric, personal elements, but I also want people to understand I didn't ask how much you work, and you work a lot, like in the sense of working on your craft, researching, studying, learning about other artists, going out and seeing other art. And so for the folks watching, there are some people where they say you don't need practice. I've never been one of those people. And I don't think art should suck to make, or like you hate what you make. Like, what's the point? But I will say I really appreciate you, Virginia, and that what you said, you make sure you're in the studio. You make sure, even if you're coming down to last minute, you do large scale work that takes hours and hours and hours and hours and weeks and months. And you have the resilience to continue and finish work. So for the people watching, I know we kept it very in the heart element, but also when you see Virginia's work, realize it took a lot of time and effort and dedication. All right. So thank you for being you.
Thank you for being you. I look forward to more talks and collaborations in the future. This
Yeah.
has been fun.
And I will see you soon.
Okay.
All
I'll
right,
see you
everyone,
soon.
you have been watching. I'm your host, Chris Carr, and this has been a discussion about the Create model presented by creativemuse.org. And today we have Virginia Wagner. All right.